scenario that most people may find familiar. One day, you meet someone, or maybe you do not even meet them properly. Maybe it is someone you have seen a few times somewhere, and maybe you've had one or two conversations with this person, and you found those conversations to be significant. And then something happens. In the course of being in contact with this person, they leave a mark on your mind. Suddenly, they are constantly on your mind. You replay the conversations you've had with this person. You analyze what they said. You also analyze what was unsaid. You notice when they have been online or when they have not. You imagine scenarios. You create scenarios in your head, things you might say, ways that the next interaction with this person could go. And then you're in the middle of a task or with someone else, and some part of your mind is still with that person. The feeling is extraordinary. There is an intensity to it that ordinary life does not usually provide. And there is also an anxiety underneath it, because eventually you worry about whether the feeling you have for this person is returned. And sometimes it might not be. But the uncertainty of that not knowing whether they feel the same way for you as you feel for them is not even a problem that resolves the feeling. Rather, it encourages and feeds your own feelings. You have probably experienced some version of what I just described. Most people have. I, for one, have. And most people have called it love or having a crush or even being obsessed. Some will say falling hard for that person. All of those names, they are trying to capture the same thing. But what I have found is that there is a more precise word for it. And this word was coined by a psychologist who spent years interviewing hundreds of people who have had this same exact experience, and found that it was consistent enough and specific enough from other emotional states to deserve its own name. The name of this concept is Limerence. I'm Angelo, and this is the Clarity Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's known as limerence. We'll talk about how it works and why it feels the way it does. We'll also take a peek at how it ends, and we'll discuss the specific and important connection between limerence and something that most people would never think to link it to, which is a lack of purpose. Let us get into it. So there was an American psychologist who in the 1970s became convinced that the existing psychological literature on romantic love was missing something. Her name was Dorothy Tennov, and she found that there was a specific state distinct from love, distinct from lust, and distinct from ordinary attraction that millions of people experienced, but it had no proper name, and there has been no serious scientific examination of this. And so she spent years trying to study it. She administered questionnaires to thousands of people, conducted several hundred in-depth interviews, and also read through centuries of personal journals, autobiographies, and literary accounts of romantic experience. And in 1979, she published her findings in a book called Love and Limerence: The Experience of Being in Love. And she named this state that she identified limerence. Now, one thing to note is that Tennov's research was qualitative, in the sense that it was built from personal accounts and interviews rather than controlled laboratory experiments. So, limerence remains an under-researched area by scientific standards, but what it is a real pattern of experience that thousands of people have independently described in strikingly similar terms. Now, with that said, what exactly is limerence according to what Tennov found? Limerence is an involuntary cognitive and emotional state characterized by intrusive, obsessive thinking about a specific person. And Tennov calls this person the limerent object. And this feeling is combined with an intense longing for reciprocation and a heightened sensitivity to any signal from that person that could be read as evidence of their feelings. Now, some of the characteristics that Tennov identified consistently across her research participants included things like intrusive and involuntary thinking about the limerent object, that occupies the mind throughout the day. There was also acute longing for reciprocation. There was also an irrationally positive evaluation of the limerent object, that is, a tendency to idealize them, to overlook or minimize their flaws, and to construct a version of them that may be significantly more flattering than the reality. Another symptom was emotional dependency on the limerent object's perceived feelings. And then there was also physical symptoms in the limerent object's presence. Things like heart racing, heightened attention, nervousness. And then another significant characteristics is a withdrawal from friendships, hobbies, and other aspects of life as the limerence expands to fill more and more of the person's mental space. Now, one of Tenov's research participants described their limerent object as my hobby, my passion, and my obsession. Now, this description captures something essential about what limerence actually is. The limerent object is not simply the focus of romantic feeling. They become an organizing principle of the person's mental life. So the most important thing to understand about limerence is what it is not. And the most important thing it is not is love. At least not love in the way that most people use the word. So here's the structural difference. Love, in the sense of mature romantic attachment, tends to deepen with the knowledge of the real person. So the more you know the person you're in love with, their flaws, their difficulties, their ordinary moments, their capacity to disappoint you, and yet you forgive, the richer the feeling becomes. So love is directed at the actual person. But in the case of limerence, it is usually directed at a construction, at an idealized version of the limerent object that the limerent person has assembled from limited information. And this is why limerence is so often most intense in the early stages of knowing someone, when the information you have about that person is minimal and the space for idealization is maximal. And it is why limerence frequently diminishes when the uncertainty resolves, when you find out definitely how they feel, or when you spend enough time with them to know them as they actually are, rather than as you have imagined them to be. Now, psychologists today often describe limerence directly as based on the uncertainty that the person you desire also desires you. So since limerence is the desire to be desired, it is a cognitive experience as well as a physical and emotional one. So this framing is important because limerence is fundamentally about whether the limerent object feels the same way as you do. Not necessarily about who they are or about what a life with them would look like. So when the limerent person is being obsessively interested in signals, searching for signs of reciprocation, all of this is directed at the question of reciprocation, and the uncertainty of that question is what sustains the limerence. This is why a clear rejection, as painful as it is, tends to end limerence faster than ambiguity does. Now, Tenov identified 3 typical endings to a limerence state. The first one is consummation. So the person discovers their feelings are being reciprocated and they enter a relationship, and the limerence often fades as the idealized object is replaced by the real person. Then there is also another ending, which is starvation. And this is when sustained non-reciprocation extinguishes hope and the limerence gradually fades, often leaving grief in its wake. And then finally there is transference. The limerence shifts to a new object before it fully extinguishes. Now this last ending is the one most people who experience limerence repeatedly will recognize. So there is this horror film that came out this year and it was a big hit. Its name is Obsession. And this movie, for me, accurately depicts what limerence is. So in the movie, for those who haven't seen it, a young man named Bear is consumed by his feelings for his friend Nikki, that instead of simply telling her how he feels, he makes a supernatural wish for her to love him more than anything in the world. Now the wish works, but what follows is a nightmare. Nikki is stripped of her choice and she becomes violent, possessive, and trapped inside a feeling she cannot control, while Bear watches and does nothing to stop it. And there was a very interesting review about the movie which read, "If you want someone to love you above all else, the only way to accomplish it is to dehumanize them, to strip away everything about them that made them someone you wanted to be with in the first place." Now, that is very horrible, but it is also exactly what Limerence does psychologically. Bear did not exactly want Nikki. What he wanted was for her to reciprocate his feelings. He wanted the question answered without the risk of vulnerability. And what that movie shows you in a very visceral way is what happens when you get exactly that. That is, when you get not the real person who chooses you, but a constructed version of them that is organized entirely around your need to be chosen. Now, limerence can occur in anyone. Tenor found it in people of every background, age, and personality type. But the research does identify consistent patterns in who is more likely to experience it intensely and also more likely to remain in it for extended periods of time. Recent research also found a consistent correlation between limerence and anxiety, also depression and anxious attachment style. People who experience significant anxiety about whether they are valued and desired by others are more likely to enter limerence states and more likely to find them intense. Also, early childhood experiences appear to be relevant. Psychology today notes that early childhood abandonment or neglect may correlate with the likelihood of experiencing limerence, and the state has been associated with post-traumatic stress disorder as well as obsessive-compulsive disorder. And then there is the social media dimension. Now, limerence is sustained by uncertainty and by the obsessive monitoring of signals. So what social media does is to provide an unlimited supply of both of these things. So you can monitor every post by your limerence object, every story, every like, every absence of a like, every reply, however how long it takes to reply, and whether there is a delay in the reply, every change in their activity status. All of these become material for the limerence person's ongoing analysis. The question of whether they feel the same way can now be investigated continuously and across multiple social media platforms at any hour. The technological environment of 2026 is almost perfectly designed to sustain a limerence state indefinitely. Now, I want to talk about the connection that I think makes this episode a genuinely very important one. And I'm going to try to be as honest and as precise as possible. So the question is, why do some people experience limerence more intensely, more frequently, and for longer durations than others? Even among people with similar anxiety levels and similar attachment histories, why does limerence consume some people's mental lives completely, while others experience something milder and more manageable? So one answer that consistently appears in clinical observation and in the writing of people who study limerence is the psychological space available for limerence to occupy is significantly related to how much of that space is already filled by something else. One writer who examined this recently put it plainly. He wrote, "The people most consumed by romantic obsessions are usually the ones most in need of something that a relationship cannot actually deliver, which is a reason to exist that they can feel in themselves. And the people who need relationships the least tend to have the healthiest ones because they are not asking a partner to perform an impossible task. They are not walking into a relationship expecting that relationship to provide identity, purpose, self-worth, and meaning simultaneously. Those things already exist in their life. The relationship just gets to be a relationship. So what Limerence does is that it provides cognitive occupation and emotional intensity and a daily structure for a mind that has not found those things somewhere else. So think about what Limerence actually does. It gives you something to think about constantly. It gives your day an emotional center. You think about things like, will this person message me? What did that thing that he did mean? Did they watch my story today? So it gives you a narrative and puts you in the middle of a story with high stakes and uncertainty and the possibility of a resolution that you are invested in. So in the absence of a compelling project or a clear direction of your life, and in the absence of a sense of who you are and what you are trying to achieve in life, Limerence provides all of these things. Not necessarily providing it well, but it provides it sufficiently enough. Now, there is a television series I watched recently. Its name is Baby Reindeer, and I recommend you guys also go see that show. It is a disturbing one, but it is a very interesting story, and it is based on a true story, and it illustrates this purpose connection better than almost anything else that I could find. Now, the protagonist in this show, his name is Donnie. He's a failing comedian with no career traction and no clear sense of who he is outside of the ambition. And his ambition at that moment was not working. And into that vacuum comes an obsessive fan who makes him feel seen and significant. And also, she was an abuser whose attention makes him feel chosen. The show is often described as a show about stalking, but underneath that, it is a study in what purposelessness makes a person vulnerable to. When you lack a purpose or a passion for what you want to be in life, that absence of a compelling reason to exist in yourself makes you extraordinarily susceptible to anyone who offers intensity, whether that intensity is healthy for you or not. So, if you recognize limerence in your own experience or in someone you care about, what is actually useful to know? The first thing is this: limerence is involuntary. Tenov was clear about this from the beginning of her research. The limerent state cannot be called into or out of existence at will. It is resistant to rational arguments and to the awareness that the limerent object is imperfect. Also to the knowledge that the obsessive thinking is causing harm. You simply cannot decide your way out of limerence. And telling someone that is experiencing limerence to stop thinking about the limerent object is about as useful as telling someone with a broken arm to stop feeling pain. The acknowledgement that it is involuntary is not an excuse for any harm that the state causes. It is a prerequisite for responding to it usefully rather than simply criticizing the person experiencing it. Now, the second thing is this: treating limerence as a problem about the limerent object misses the more important intervention point. The question of whether to pursue the person or not, whether to send that message or not, or whether they like you or not, these are not the point, and they are not the center of the problem. The more useful question is, what vacuum is the limerence filling? Because the limerence will be sustained for as long as that vacuum exists. So you address the vacuum, and the limerence loses the psychological territory it needs to expand into. Now, what this means is that anybody experiencing limerence should start asking the questions: what absorbing work do they not have yet? What creative projects or meaningful goal or genuine contribution to society is missing from their life? Who are the more important friendships that they need to be investing into? And what identity questions are they avoiding by letting the limerence occupy that space? These are harder questions, and they are the more productive ones. And finally, If the limerence you're experiencing is causing significant disruption to your daily functioning, your work, your sleep, it's affecting your existing relationships, please consider speaking to a therapist or a counselor, because the pattern it reveals about what is missing from your life is worth examining with professional support, not just personal reflection. And so finally, in this episode, we talked about what limerence is. I said it's an involuntary psychological state of intense, obsessive preoccupation with another person, characterized by a longing for reciprocation and sustained by the uncertainty of whether that reciprocation exists. And we also said that limerence is more likely to occur in people with anxious attachment styles and also in periods of identity formation. And we also said that it occurs very much in people who lack absorbing sources of purpose and meaning outside of romantic relationships. So the limerence fills the space that purpose should occupy. It provides a reason to think, an emotional center, a daily narrative, a sense of stakes, all of the things that a life with genuine direction provides organically. And this means that the most useful response to limerence is not to focus harder on the limerent object, it is to ask yourself honestly and seriously, what's the limerence found when it arrived? What was already empty and left a vacuum for the limerence to fill? And what you can begin to do today to fill it with. Investing in already existing friendships, picking a goal and committing to it. That is the clarity. And this has been the Clarity Podcast. I am Angelo, and if this episode gave you a word for something that you have experienced or helped you understand someone you care about a little better, please share it to someone else. This is the kind of conversations that need to be happening more often and more clearly. Please follow us on our socials. Follow us on X. The handle is in the description of the episode. And also send topic suggestions to our email at theclaritypodcast1@gmail.com. The email is also in the description of the episode. See you next week with a new episode, and until then, think clearly.